The Indian River County Planning and Zoning Commission meeting of August the 12th, 2010 will come to order. Will you please stand for the pledge?
Like allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I need an approval of the minutes for July 22nd, 2010. Approval? Second. Approval and second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously. Item number 3 is an item on consent. Citrus Way Estates request for a preliminary plat approval for an 11-lot single-family affidavit exemption project to be known as Citrus Way Estates. Does anyone wish to pull the item?
No.
Move approval is on the consent agenda.
And a second?
Second?
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Consent item passes. Item number 4 is a public hearing tabled from the July 8th and July 22nd meetings on item A, which is legislative, and item B, which is quasi-judicial. The way I would like for the Commission to handle this is that we have general discussion under oath of any consideration for A and B, and hear all the components of a normal hearing, and then at the end of that process, we would then have a single vote on item A and a single vote on item B. Hearing no opposition from the Commission, I'd like to go ahead with that. I'm now going to have anyone in the audience who wishes to speak to this item, would you please stand to be sworn in?
Would you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Thank you. Counsel?
I do want to note for the record before we get started that I did distribute to the members of the Commission as well as to each of the attorneys of record a memorandum regarding quasi-judicial and legislative standards and procedures, and I have given a copy of that to the clerk, so it is being entered into the record. I just wanted to note that.
Thank you. Staff? Stan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, I'm Stan Bowling, County Planning Director, and I'll go through a PowerPoint to give background on both items. The Land Development Regulation, or LDR amendment, and the rezoning are both closely related and were tabled from the July 8th meeting and with no discussion at the July 22nd meeting. And we're going to present those together and then have separate motions as the Chairman just stated. A little bit of background on commercial nodes in general. Commercial industrial nodes are larger nodes. They do not have a limitation in size, and they serve significant areas with a broad range of uses. We also have neighborhood commercial nodes, and that's the subject of the LDR amendment and the rezoning tonight, neighborhood commercial nodes. They serve smaller areas. In fact, they have a 5-acre limitation in size, and they have a limited range of convenience uses. The CN zoning is a separate zoning approach, and so we have just a few areas zoned CN. However, those are being essentially phased out, and we will have mixed-use developments going forward. So we have kind of the CN zoning is kind of a dinosaur in a way, but it is still, there's still an existing policy in the comp plan and the allowance for the amendment and for the rezoning request at this time. Commercial nodes in general, a few things to keep in mind that are important in considering the LDR amendment. One is that commercial nodes tend to be centered around major intersections, and they do cross roadways. They are surrounded with residential uses, which are, in essence, their service area. So for large CI nodes, you have large areas that they serve, and the CN nodes have smaller areas. And it's important, regardless of the node size, to avoid stripped commercial pattern. And that's why, one of the reasons why nodes are separated, and there's separation distances between nodes. It's more efficient from a traffic management standpoint and from an aesthetic standpoint, and you don't have stripped commercial and some of the inefficiencies and negative aesthetics along an entire roadway. Here's an example from our own land use map. You'll see State Road 60 or 20th Street across the top in a red line, and I-95 in green on the left-hand side. There's a large red area around I-95 and State Road 60. That's a large commercial industrial node. You'll also see further to the right or to the east a large node that's centered around Kings Highway or 58th Avenue, and it goes all the way up to where the Indian River Mall is. But if you look at the brown area that's in between, you'll notice that that area is all designated residential, and so that we don't have strip commercial all along State Road 60, and it's something that's in our comprehensive plan to avoid strip development, and that's an example of it. This particular amendment deals with separation distances between neighborhood commercial nodes and adjacent neighborhood commercial or commercial industrial nodes. Separation distance is the subject of the amendment. And I just wanted to show this example in the northwest corner of State Road 60 and 74th Avenue, with the subject of the Buildex property. Right now, that property is about 0.75 miles away from the eastern edge of this commercial industrial area that runs a little bit east of 82nd Avenue. So it's about 0.75 miles away. There is a separation distance requirement in the code now that can be reduced to 0.9, so it does not meet that criterion for an expansion. Going further to the east is about 0.9 miles actually to a neighborhood commercial area here at the northwest corner of 66th Avenue and State Road 60. Looking further in here, just one thing about this particular amendment, there is a node size, CN node size maximum of 5 acres. So in this particular case, in this location, the existing sealed suite site is 2.83 acres. So no more than 2.17 acres of other property could be put into the neighborhood commercial node in this particular area because the 5-acre maximum does apply. The proposed amendment is to allow a 30% reduction from the 1 mile requirement, which would make it 0.7 miles a separation distance, and has, as proposed, has limited applicability. In fact, given the current zoning and configurations, the only place this land development regulation would apply is the Buildex site. It is at the northwest corner of State Road 60 and 74th Avenue. This is from the land development regulation amendment proposal itself to allow the 30% reduction, and there are a number of criteria that would have to be met, and 2 that have been added under this proposal really limit the applicability. One is that the site that would be the subject of the reduced separation distance must already be zoned PRO, Pro. So it already has a commercial zoning, and that was an important factor in this land development regulation amendment to avoid making more strict development. If a site is already zoned PRO, it already has a type of commercial zoning, you're not increasing any of the road frontage to go from residential to commercial. The site is already zoned commercial. And the other criterion is that the subject site be located at the intersection of an arterial road and collector road. And that again is to make sure that that separation distance, if it is reduced, that it's centered around right where a node is supposed to be, and that is at the intersection. That again gets back to avoiding the strip development. The LDR amendment is being brought in tandem with the PRO rezoning, and the rezoning is dependent on the LDR amendment. And both requests are being scheduled together, and going forward to the Board of County Commissioners would be scheduled together as well with that. Staff's recommendation on the LDR amendment is that the Planning and Zoning Commission recommend that the Board of County Commissioners adopt the amendment. I'd like to give some background on the rezoning now. The Buildex rezoning request from PRO to CN. The subject site is shown on this aerial, State Road 60 going left to right, east to west here, 74th Avenue up and down, north and south. The subject site is a portion of a 3-acre site that was actually originally part of Indian River Estates and was sold off by the owner of Indian River Estates a number of years ago. And you all heard at the July 8th meeting that there was and is a deed restriction in place giving some type of architectural control or approval to the owner of Indian River Estates for whatever is developed on that site. That is a private deed restriction, not a county regulation or requirement. So it would be privately enforced. Out of this 3-acre site, 2.17 acres are requested to be rezoned. And the site has been used off and on for construction yards. In fact, it's being used currently, as of today, even for some of the State Road 60 project. You'll see some equipment being used, and that's obviously a temporary use there. When Indian River Estates proper was developed, you've probably seen, if you've been out by the site is actually bermed up, and there's a wall, and there's some mature trees and landscaping, live oaks and oleander around the edges of this particular property. From the 2.17 acres that's outlined here in black, it's 100 feet to the nearest Indian River Estates unit here to the west, and then with an intervening PRO piece that would stay in place, which would be 100 feet wide. It's actually 150 feet from that north line of the proposed CN to the nearest unit in Indian River Estates. You can see the Seal Suite facility across the road that's on 2.83 acres, and that is zoned CN. The purpose of the request is to secure more uses, a broader range of uses from the PRO to the CN zoning district, and the CN district is allowed on the site's land use designation, which is M1. To the north of the property that is the subject of the rezoning would be another strip owned by the current owner, Buildex, that would remain PRO, and then Indian River Estates further to the north. To the west is Indian River Estates. To the south is State Road 60 and Sealed Suite. And to the east is Village Green Mobile Home Park. It's actually kind of a vacant portion of the park over here, right in this corner, and the rest is zoned 8 units per acre for mobile home. You can see kind of the bigger picture here. There's a fair amount of kind of dense, for this county, dense residential development in terms of Indian River Estates and the mobile home park that's near the site itself. This shows the land use designation of the subject site, and most of the surrounding properties are M1, residential up to 8 units per acre. The purple is mobile home residential park up to 8 units per acre as well. The criteria analyzed with this rezoning, the same as other rezonings. Staff looked at concurrency, consistency with the comprehensive plan, environmental impacts, and compatibility with surrounding uses. With respect to concurrency, this application for rezoning is exempt because PRO and CN are considered to have the same intensity of use for concurrency purposes. They're in a group of categories in Chapter 910, so a concurrency test is not required at the zoning level. It will be required, however, for whatever is developed on the site, and that's the detailed concurrency at the time of site plan review. And I just add that there are no concurrency or capacity issues in this area at all. Consistency with the comprehensive plan, as noted in staff's report, there are several policies that staff looked at with respect to this type of zoning, CN zoning being appropriate in higher density designations within the urban service area, an urban scale type of development. It does not exceed the 5-acre requirement. This node that exists here with Sealed Suite would be expanded, but would be limited to a total of 5 acres. And this type of zoning is consistent with the LDRs if the LDR is amended. As far as consistency with the CN district regulations, again, the regulations themselves have the 5-acre maximum. That's being complied with this rezoning. The separation distance is not met with this rezoning, but would be if the proposed LDR change is approved. Regarding environmental impacts, staff's assessment is whether this site is developed under PRO or CN. There would be no difference in the environmental impacts. The site does have some trees that will need to be protected on it, but a lot of it is cleared, and there are no jurisdictional, environmentally sensitive lands on the site. Compatibility, staff looked at the proposal, and to the north of the property will be a 100-foot strip of PRO would remain owned by BuildX at this time, and then an existing buffer along Indian River Estates and separation from units to the north. Same to the west, except that's a 100-foot separation distance and the existing buffer that's already in place with Indian River Estates. Staff also looked at the fact that there will be buffers as well and opaque features required with development of this site abutting the buffer that's already in place for Indian River Estates. To the east is a collector road, 74th Avenue, and a higher density mobile home park. And to the south is State Road 60 and in the same zoning, CN. So staff's evaluation is that the rezoning request is compatible. Staff's conclusion: the rezoning request is compatible with surrounding uses, is consistent with the comprehensive plan, it's exempt from concurrency test at this rezoning level, there are no additional environmental impacts that would result from the rezoning, and it's consistent with the CN district regulations as proposed. And I just want to put that in capital letters. That's the caveat. And with that, staff supports the rezoning request, and I would be glad to try to answer any questions that P&Z members have, and the applicant may have a presentation as well.
Commissioners, questions of staff?
Stan, you said that this was the only area where this rezoning from PRO to CN would apply?
That's correct. There are very few properties zoned PRO in the county, and others are either not at a major intersection or are already very close to other commercial industrial areas. So this is the one that is kind of off by itself, and that this amendment could apply to.
Thank you.
Stan, because I remember it's been 8 or 9 years ago, at one point he approached the Seal Suite people about buying the CN. If he bought the CN from Seal Suite, he'd still be going through the same process we're looking at now?
Well, he would be, again, that is correct. In other words, if he is reconfiguring or shifting the node, there still is that current separation distance problem, so to speak, with the current regulation, that it only allows 0.9 mile separation.
The dilemma here is that corner, because the CN was put in the past. It was almost random, pick the north, that's the southwest corner. There was conversation about having commercial in that intersection. The separation distances weren't met, but they were allowed to put commercial, and I'm not sure who made the choice, but it was put in the southwest corner, and it's 10 or 15 years ago, and before all of this came to pass, as I remember. And since Seal Suite may or may not have wanted the CN, they haven't been willing to sell it or whatever, as I understand it. But that's what makes this a little bit more onerous than just simply saying, well, he bought it, he's got it, that's the way life is, because there was a reason for the CN being on that corner to begin with.
Right, and if Butel bought the CN, which in essence would mean that Seal Suite would be zoned PRO,
right,
and therefore Butel could get the CN. The only difference it would make is instead of the 2.17 acres, he could go to a total full 3 acres, but we would still need the LDR amendment for the separation distance.
Right. Okay.
So.
I guess the commission would like to listen to the attorneys. Applicant first, please. Representatives of both parties.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure I've ever heard that before. My name is Bruce Barquette, and I'm representing the applicant. Appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight. I'll be covering some of the same ground that Stan covered, just because he does such a thorough job, and because
No mic.
I don't think the mic's on.
I don't know what to tell you.
Just speak a little bit.
Green light's on, yeah.
How about the other one? Bruce, a little closer.
Yeah, the podium.
By the podium.
Well, we need the tech to,
Is that better?
Yes.
Thank you. You got the introduction, right? Bruce Barquette, representing the applicant. John Dean, the architect, also here representing the applicant. We're going to split our presentation, if you don't mind. George Butel is out of the state. He couldn't make it. He's up in North Carolina tonight, and I apologize for that. Let me get just a couple of housekeeping matters out of the way, because these are some of the things that you have to consider, and these are really not issues, but they need to be made for the record, and Stan already covered some of them. The site is within the urban service boundary. The rezoning has no concurrency implications because it's not a difference between the density or intensity of the current zoning district.
Mr. Barquette,
Yes, sir.
excuse my interruption. Is there any way we can get that mic ramped up? I don't think some of the people in the audience are hearing him.
Actually, we're having trouble hearing
Yeah,
him here,
if
too.
if the tech could come down. And the mic needs to be turned up.
I can speak like this, but it's really uncomfortable.
No, that makes it worse.
Maybe you
Throw
could sit
mic.
at Mr. Bowling's seat for a minute.
Does that work?
I wonder if that mic works better.
Sorry, Mr. Barquette, we want to hear what you
Doesn't really
say.
matter. We just need to hear you.
Yeah, pull up a chair and get comfortable.
Is that better?
No,
Is that better?
no, too close.
You're too close now, Bruce.
It's not.
This is very interesting. How's that?
It must be here.
Would you like to come up here, Bruce?
Let's wait,
Not in this lifetime.
let's wait just a minute. The tech is on his way down here. I
But we
just saw
want to
him
hear you.
moving.
Bruce, I've never known you to be, your voice to be quiet, shy, and retiring.
My voice doesn't really carry.
Man with a plan.
I don't know.
We can't.
They can't.
I'll try to lean over. How's that? Is that any better?
Yeah, that is better.
I think we need to get longer stems for these microphones. All right. I was just going over the housekeeping. As I said, the site is within the urban service boundary. The rezoning has no concurrency implications, as Stan explained. The rezoning is consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies of the comprehensive plan, and we can address that in more detail if that becomes an issue, but it is so far not an issue. The rezoning is limited to 2.17 acres because the parcel across the street is 2.83 acres, and the CN node is limited to 5 acres in size. And if any inconsistencies with the LDRs would be remedied by the amendment that you're looking at tonight. So those are the housekeeping matters. I'd like to give you some important background about this piece of property, because Stan mentioned that this LDR amendment would only apply to this parcel of property, but that's because this parcel of property has some unique history to it. In June of 1985, Adult Communities Total Services Acts, which is the developer of Indian River Estates, requested that the County Commission rezone this corner to C1A, commercial zoning, which is the forerunner of the CN district. The uses were the same, the restrictions were the same, or were in the developing stage. Their request was for a little over 7 acres at the time. At the time, the C1A zoning district and the commercial node concept was still developing. It came before this board, and this board felt that 7 acres of C1A would be a little too large for a commercial neighborhood node, and you suggested, not you, but your predecessor suggested, that the node size for these C1A districts be limited to 6 acres. That decision was taken to the Board of County Commission for final action. The Board of County Commissioners heard the arguments of council and the planning staff, and they decided to limit the size of the commercial node, or the C1A district, to 3 acres, and the applicant, ACTS, the developer of the community, the Indian River Estates community, agreed to limit the size of its application to 3 acres. So the 3 acres that are before you tonight went before the County Commission in 1985 or 1986, and was in fact zoned C1A, which has the same uses as the CN district that we're here tonight with. At the County Commission meeting, ACTS made presentations And I just want to quote what some of the representatives said. And by the way, ACT there are no villains in this room tonight. Adult Communities Total Services is a first-class company. The Indian River States is a first-class community. The people that live here have every right to voice their concerns, and they're afraid of the unknown. And there's I don't have any complaints about ACTS or the community. And they are very good planners, and their plan for this property was to put in neighborhood commercial uses to benefit their residents. And here's what they said. They said, we feel that this location is ideal for a small commercial neighborhood node which would meet the unique needs of Indian River Estates, a life care community. And then George Logie, the general contractor for the development, indicated that he believed that in the future the bulk of the population will reside on the north side of State Road 60, and what they are looking to do there is simply to have a small area to supply basic needs and some services, not only for their own community of, at the time, 475 senior citizens, but also to the residents of the surrounding area. They want the facility to be an asset to the community. Now, these are the ACTS representatives speaking to the commission, and their predictions came out true. The bulk of the residents are on the north side of State Road 60 area. The rezoning was granted to ACTS because ACTS knew that it was the right thing for this property. They wanted to make it part and parcel of their community. Ultimately, that zoning was lost because the county had a use it or lose it policy with respect to neighborhood commercial nodes. So the rezoning reverted several years later. You had to use it in, I think, 18 months, and it wasn't used, and it was the rezoning reverted. It wasn't 18 months later; it was several years later. I'd like to discuss a little bit with you about the purpose of a CN district, because in your code it says that the commercial node district is to provide highly restricted commercial uses to serve primarily the residents of the immediate area with limited intensity and to ensure compatibility with nearby residential uses. In other words, the district is designed with safeguards to serve the neighbors surrounding it. And it was designed for implementation in areas just like this. This location is a perfect example of the zoning. I want to get into some of the details about this particular location in just a minute. But what kinds of protections did they build in? Well, first of all, they limited the size of the node. It can't be more than 5 acres. And in fact, this rezoning only involves 2.17 acres. Secondly, they limited the types of uses that can go in there. You can't have a drive-through restaurant, for example. You can't have an ice cream store. You can have a small convenience store or a grocery store or a hairdresser or a small liquor store. You can have the kinds of things that people use in their everyday lives. It's designed to serve the surrounding properties. Why is this good? Well, from a planning perspective, what Stan just told you is that they're phasing out the neighborhood commercial node concept, but what they're phasing in its place is the MXD concept, which means you integrate the commercial uses right into the residential property. In other words, not only should this node not be separated from Indian River Estates, there should be roads going back and forth between them so that they can walk to and from this. There should be integration into the community. That's what the current concept is. The reason is it keeps people from driving great distances to get the goods and services they need for an everyday living. It keeps the county from having to put utilities great distances to get to these uses. It protects the infrastructure and it protects the resources. I mean, that's what the current thinking is, and that's what the thinking was when the CN district was created. The CN district also has built-in protective features such as it requires a 6-foot opaque buffer. There can be no downgrading of the level of service for any road serving the property. Now that means not like with a regular concurrency review, you look at what the level of service adopted for the community is. Let's say the level of service on a thoroughfare is level of service D. If you have a project that takes the level of service from a C to a D, your project can go forward because you haven't gone below level of service D. That's not true for a neighborhood commercial node. If your traffic study showed that it went from a C to a D, you couldn't be approved because it can't reduce the level of service at all. And not below the adopted standard, it can't take it to the next level. So it's got more restrictions than the regular concurrency review. It can't have a negative impact on surrounding properties, and of course it can't be more than 5 acres. Now let me get to the last part of this. This is the important part. We're here tonight to discuss this specific property, and it has some characteristics that you need to be aware of. And John Dean is going to go into them in a little bit more detail, but first of all, as I said, the purpose for which Axe, the developer of Indian River Estates, created this parcel of this particular size in this location was to put this use on there, to put a commercial use on there. That was the inception of this property. That's why it's not part of the Axe community right now. Second, there was already a masonry wall surrounding the property, but separating the property from the Indian River Estates project. Third, there will remain a 100-foot buffer inside this property that's going to be PRO on the north side of the property because it's just too big. The property, the PRO, the CN district can only be 2.17 acres. This property is larger than that, so there's going to be a 100-foot strip zoned PRO separating this property from Indian River Estates on the north. Fourth, the property must comply with State Road 60 corridor regulations. And Mr. Dean is going to review those regulations for you in more detail, but just as a preview, you need to know that they require the State Road 60 corridor restrictions have an extra layer of protections for buffers, lighting, signage, site plan, and design, and architecture. So there are other restrictions on the property over and above what other neighborhood commercial nodes may have to go through. And then lastly, and this is kind of interesting, this property, as I said, was owned by Axe. When Axe sold it, they retained the right to review and approve any plans that go on this property. There are restrictive covenants in place on the property, and for the record, I'd like to introduce a copy of the deed, which contain the restrictive covenants. Rita?
Pardon me.
Yeah,
We got
do
this
have
the
one.
last
Thank you
meeting.
very much.
So not to belabor the point, what that means is whoever develops this property is going to have the cooperation of Axe. It's going to be done well, or else it's not going to be done. Axe has a veto power.
Excuse me, Bruce, on that deed restriction, is that not just the architectural design of the building? That's the only restriction that they have to approve?
Well, I don't know if you call it the only restriction. It says, it deals with architectural design. It says the criteria for approval, they must submit all site plans and building plans to the grantor for approval. The criteria for approval shall be the architectural compatibility with the Indian River Estates Life Care Project located adjacent to the property.
Okay, so it's strictly architectural design that they can rule on, nothing else?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if site plan doesn't have much to do with architecture, so I don't know that it's as restrictive as that. I mean, I think that's the design, the goal, but your site plan can also be reviewed, I think. But you're right. I mean, that's what it says. The point is, Axe knew it was going to be developed commercially. They just want to make sure they had architectural protection, and they've got that. So, I mean, your point is well taken, but it is what it is. That's the restriction. That's the only restriction Axe felt like it needed to put on the property. We respectfully request that you grant the rezoning. It's a small request. It's less than 2¼ acres. The property needs to be utilized in the way that Axe intended it to be utilized for commercial use. In addition, my client wanted me to stress to you that we need to stimulate jobs and growth and economic movement in this county, and that's no secret. And I will tell you that as a lawyer who represents a lot of developers, that's true. We need to quit shutting the door on people that want to do things around here. And I understand that the people in Indian River Estates are afraid of the unknown. That's natural. But you can't have a better piece of property, a property that was designed for a use like this, than this piece of property. If we've got this district, this is where it belongs. And this is not going to be detrimental to the people in the community. Once it's developed and used, they will be using it. We did meet with our neighbors. I can't say that the meeting was productive because basically what we learned was they're just against the rezoning. There was no middle ground. They just don't want this rezoned. There was no offer of interplay. There was no concessions offered or made. They just don't want it rezoned, period. That's as far as the meeting got.
Excuse me, Bruce, that was, the whole purpose of us postponing this was to allow that meeting to go forward, and it's that the objections that I remember being voiced were really surrounding more of a gas station convenience store, and
George, I can tell you, I took the oath tonight specifically so I can tell you that the results of this meeting, I said, what uses are you afraid of? They wouldn't specify any uses, and I didn't lose. That's all. They wouldn't tell me any uses. They wouldn't tell me anything other than noise activity, and they don't want it rezoned. That's all I got. And Greg Castellino was there. He'll confirm that. They didn't specify any particular uses that they objected to at my meeting.
And that was out of the scheduled meeting that was set after
That was a
we
meeting in my
tabled.
conference room after the P&Z
LDO.
meeting. Yes, sir. And it was, it wasn't adversarial. It wasn't, hot-blooded or anything like that. I'm just saying that that's all we got. So we called it a close. But be that as it may, this is not atypical. I understand.
But the overture, this was done, I'm just making sure how the effort was made, because that was a big concern to everybody that night. That was the tabling of this motion was really more for the purpose of having that meeting, so.
We had the meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, we had the meeting. And as I said, I've been doing this a long time, so have you. There are always concerns when property nearby is going to be developed. I did one thing that did come out of the meeting, and a lot of the people voiced it, was they were afraid of the unknown. They don't know what's going to go there. What's going to go there is something that's nice and compatible, and something that they'll use, and something that's good for the community, and something that the property was intentionally designed for by the developer of their community, who is a good developer, and they have a nice community. That's what's going to go there. Yeah. That's what you're here for. If this isn't really a voiced vote, I understand that it's not a popular decision with the people sitting behind me, and I have no gripe with the people sitting behind me, but I call upon you to rise above that. You need to make the good planning decision, and the good planning decision is to do what this property was intended for. I'm available to answer any questions, but I'd like to turn it over to John Dean, because he's got a little bit more to add.
Bruce, may I ask you a question?
Sure.
How would your client feel about conditioned rezoning?
Yeah, unfortunately, you don't have the ability to do that, but that was the purpose of the meeting. I kept asking, what conditions do you like? We couldn't get anything. David, I'm telling you, we got nothing. So I'm not offering any concessions tonight because my client's not here and I can't. But you don't have the ability to condition the rezoning anyway, I don't think.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You could either go see it or we can do that. Yeah, there's no condition.
My name is John Dean. I'm an architect, and I'm very familiar with Buildex, and I'm Butel family. I'm also very familiar with this property, and I'm going to try not to be redundant. Staff did a good job, but I have a few photographs I want to talk about and just a little bit of comment. First off, the staff always does a good job of researching, and they either say yes or no. So in this case, I'm glad to say I fully agree with what they came up with after I've looked at this, and they've done a thorough study on it. I find it really interesting that the ACTS community is here. I don't think they're not here to oppose the PRO. They just don't want any change. And when I look at their master site plan, what I find so interesting about it is how the project is just exactly what you would do if you planned for this. Every safeguard is in place. So as an architect or a planner, I look at it and I say, well, this has already been set up. This is what it was set for. And then when I look at the history of it, going back to the 80s, and we see that the impetus was through the ACTS community. And again, we have a lot of respect for them. They've done a great job. And if you look at their overall site plan, you'll see they have this here for this reason, this here for this reason, and this here for this reason. And they have this here for this reason. So if you'll notice, first when we talked about it there, this red flashy isn't the best in the world, but it'll work a little bit. The first one is this separation that's on this side already, in place with a 6-foot high wall. That's the wall that is required by today's zoning, already in place. Now, what does that imply to us? If we develop this as we're requesting, we have another 6-foot wall to put in, which can be changed to a 6-foot opaque landscape item that you can't see through. So you have a double safeguard. You've got one already in by the owner next door, and then you have that same setup back on this piece here where there'll be 100 feet of PRO, and then there's a wall, and then there's a road. That road is not put there by accident. That's a well-designed project that has already buffered itself from any commercial activity, which they know is going in there. So it's a matter of degree, but it's already been designed, it's been put in place. I believe the planners and the developer of acts have done a good job. They knew what they were doing. When they bought it, they put it all in place. It's there. The buffer's there. The property's protected. Now, I think possibly they'd like it to be a park. It's not going to be a park unless they buy it and make it a park. It's not going to be a park. What we can do is make it a little bit more friendly to the kind of neighborhood things that would likely go there. We've got some good examples across the community. And again, there's always the unknown, but if we take a moment, and you may like some of these and you may not, but Pelican Plaza is an example of this kind of neighborhood node. You see a barber shop, you see an architect, a travel agency. This particular node sits in a residential...
John, are these going to be compatible size-wise, or are these bigger? I mean, just so that we all know what
these are actually bigger. Okay. These are bigger, but I'm showing them as cases of where it works. Actually, okay. I don't know of any little... There might be another little tiny... This is smaller than those, so it has less impact. This is part of that neighborhood, and again, the photograph's not the best showing up, but it's landscape and then some commercial, and then right across the street is two-story residential. So it's surrounded. So that's an example of one that is working. Another one that we can look at would be the village shops. I think everybody along A1A really enjoys that project. It has a real residential character to it. It's surrounded by homes behind it and across the street. Again, highly landscaped. The landscape requirements on this particular parcel are extreme to what they used to be when this concept was brought up to have this property. And again, along that one, we see this hedge on the corridor plan. It's a 2-foot berm and a 4-foot hedge. I mean, this is, and then the landscape requirements are very stiff. And I've got some more, but I'm going to hold that just to say that there are good examples of this working well, and this is smaller than any of those. I'm going to also show a picture of this site, and I'm not showing this as a site plan. I'm showing this as a buffer diagram. On this particular, can you hear me when I'm here? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. On this particular site, there's automatically going to be this, a minimum of a 15-foot buffer on the front with that 2-foot berm and the hedge. And then the requirement of the trees, it's about 4 canopies and 5 smaller trees. That's a tree every 10 feet. So this is a thick hedge. Now this goes all the way around the property. You've got a 6-foot wide wall in place. This is a photograph of, again, some of this. This is from Route 60 looking north. You can barely see the buildings with the buffer that's in place, the 6-foot wall, and the nicely grown up oak trees. You know, so we're going to have another wall in front of that, another line of landscape. So, you know, as far as invasion there, not at all. It was planned for by that community, and it's coming about. It's just not under their ownership. On the west side, as mentioned before, there's 100 feet plus to the units. You've got the wall, and then we're going to have to put in either a 15 or a 25-foot parcel, depending if it's subdivided or not. And again, that'll be another one of these very thick landscape with this wall, whether it's opaque concrete or landscape material, likely landscape material because there's already a wall. Across the back, that right down here is where that 100 feet PRO comes. That's likely, again, this is not showing a site plan, that's likely going to be some kind of water management area for somebody effectively developing this piece of land. And again, you've got your hedge and your wall. And then going down 74th, again, we're into a minimum of 15 foot, just like across 60. So I'm saying it's isolated. There were some comments at a meeting about health, safety, and welfare, And in fact, this property has about 30,000 cars that go in front of it every day. If I were to stand here and start counting cars, I would go like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'd be here for 8.5 hours. That's how many cars are going by. 8.5 hours it would take me to count that, okay? This project, when it's developed, it's actually going to make it a usable piece of real estate. It's going to become a sound buffer to those very homes. It's going to cut a lot of the sound because of the landscape, and likely, you know, again, we don't know what kind of building, but it's going to be a building 7,000 to 8,000 feet, small node, and it's going to act as a buffer, plus this wall and everything. So it's actually helping the community in that sense. Sidewalks will be redone. The sidewalks that are there right now are inadequate for what they should be. So as this thing is developed, it's actually going to be a real plus factor for the community. And although right now some people might be feeling, well, we don't need it, when those uses come in there, they will use it, they will utilize it, and it'll both stir the economy for what that's worth. It makes these conveniences right there for folks, and it's a neighborhood node. As I go back through this, once again, the early history of it, the impetus of this is from ACTS. Back in the late 1980s, the fellow that I first worked with when I came here, Dave Robinson, they had a project for 21,000 square feet of commercial here. That was a site plan that was approved, but they never did the final details, and whoever did backed out. So again, it's got that history that is just the continuity of it being this kind of a use. When I look at the corridor plan that we have in place, county has done an outstanding job on the Route 60 corridor plan. There's item after item. The lighting is controlled, so we're not going to impede on the neighbors. The landscape materials, the way the parking has to go, the drainage, all of these requirements just make for a good, unique project. And in the actual Route 60 corridor plan, there's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and basically it wraps up by saying, as a significant business and residential center and a major entrance into Indian River County, the corridor will have an attractive, well-maintained, orderly, and uncluttered appearance. Corridor will be characterized by impressive vegetation, landscaping, complementary buildings, sign control, and it goes on, safe transit system. And again, we've got this thing in place to do exactly what we're trying to do. So I don't see where there's any fear for somebody who understands that. The architecture is very well controlled. So again, that kind of nips that right in the bud. I'm going to conclude by just repeating, and I'm going to lean heavily on the staff comment here, and this is from page 5 under the analysis of July 9th, and it says, in this section, an analysis of reasonableness of the rezoning request will be presented. Specifically, the section will include analysis of impact on public facilities, analysis of request on consistency, compatibility with surrounding area, potential impact of environment and quality, consistency with the district regulations, and their conclusion, requested zoning is compatible with the surrounding area and is consistent with the goal, objectives, and policies of the comprehensive plan. I can't do any better than that if I was doing it myself. I'm just saying it's there. And then the second part is in the July 13th memo, it's staff's opinion that the proposed LDR amendment is structured to prevent creation of a strip commercial development. This is a unique parcel. I think Bruce made that clear. You can see it by the map. There's no other place that this is going to happen. It makes good sense. And to accommodate the rare circumstance where site is zoned PRO located in a major traffic area, which we have. And I'll just leave by putting that picture up once again that ACTS has a great community. They designed for this. It's set up for this. It's here. There's nothing big. All small, all perfect for the neighborhood. Thank you.
Any questions of Mr. Dean?
None of Mr. Dean, but I'd like to speak to the staff for a second.
Sure.
Bob or Stan, it's interesting what he said about the buffering, because I know the corridor plan for the front, and they have to, the doubling up we wouldn't require a second wall, but we would require, is it a type B buffer, which would probably be landscaping?
There would still be a 6-foot opaque feature required, and part of the sense, but there's some options to choose for that. And I think what would make sense in this case, because you do want you don't want to depend upon the neighbor that's already built the buffer. If something were to happen on their side, it's still the obligation of the commercial developer to have a buffer in place as well. They could do landscape only, for instance. They would not have to put another wall up. That probably would not be good.
But between residential, multifamily residential, and a commercial, what level of buffering are we talking about?
Between multifamily zoning or multifamily use, it's a C buffer, which can be 15 feet wide native or 20 feet wide if you have non-natives in it. Now, in this case, I believe the adjacent units, they are attached, but I believe they're platted, in which case they're treated like single family, which would require type B buffer, 25 feet wide.
That would be to the west?
West.
Would
Yes.
that be considered around the whole property? The other part would be is, that, and I'm curious if we have a commercial node on the the commercial versus the PRO is, there would be no buffering there, but if the commercial goes in as he depicts on his chart, but I mean, the reality is we would have to buffer that at some point.
Yes.
And
again, that would be the same,
to the north. So, I mean,
same as on the west. In other words, if there was a site plan that was split zoned.
So would the logical requirement be to put buffering where it's outlined on the property line, or would we?
Yes. And if the
Or would we
entire
put it
site came in
closer
for
to the
development, it
building?
would go along both the west and the north perimeter of the entire 3-acre site.
The type C, or you're considering it single family, right?
Correct. If it's platted,
Because it's plat over
I think
West
the
and the
units are
north.
platted. Yes, I believe they're both
The east
platted.
is multifamily, so it would be C, or is it platted as well?
No, it's the same basic phase, same type of units immediately to the west and immediately to the north.
So it's not a type C, it's going to be type B?
Yes, if they are platted, and I believe they are platted.
No, the main reason I ask is that with a wall, we don't have a provision that says if a wall is in place, they can't put a second wall to satisfy the 6-foot opaque feature. We would certainly request, and I would hope whoever was up here, if it ever happened to that, would fight hard to have the B in landscaping and not in a wall. I mean, that's common sense, but it's more expensive at times, and so sometimes somebody may or may not want to do that.
Let me correct something. In that if the perimeter that touches the north part of the overall 3-acre site is zone PRO, it's a type C buffer. So
That
you're
was
talking
my
about a
next question.
15 or a
That's
20
why
foot
I was asking.
requirement.
But how
there.
would you relieve? I mean, this is because of this being as unique as it is. There's still it may be the PRO may be a type C buffer, but the commercial would be a type B buffer. So how would you or could you relieve the type B buffer? I mean, if the commercial goes in, they've got to put a type B buffer in, or is it only because it's going to PRO and PRO transitions that they would be able to do a type C in the north
That's
without
exactly
having
right.
to worry about the B?
Yeah, the PRO, when you look at it this way, the PRO is either going to be an office or small bank use, not quite the same as
Okay,
CN.
but because
or it's gonna-
commercial touches PRO, then it's relieved of the B.
Right,
Okay.
or it's going to be a soft improvement in stormwater, so you've already got more separation because of that.
What if the buffer, there's no buffer required between the CN and the Pro, though, is there?
That's correct. There is some
Wait.
landscape required, but it's not a buffer type, not a full buffer type.
Well, it's just like a C or something?
It's not even a C. Just some canopy trees every so often. And if they have interconnected parking, then where there's parking, there'd be no landscape.
So this could actually be sold off as two projects, a
Yeah.
100-foot Pro?
Yes.
And then the other 2.17 acres as CN?
That's correct.
To the west side of this, what they're looking to have rezoned CN, though, there's an additional piece there that is still going to remain Pro, and how wide is that?
No, the configuration was still kind of in flux back on July 8th. And there, at one point in time, there was a thought of putting a PRO strip down the side, but that's gone away. That's not what's being proposed. What's being proposed is essentially a 100-foot strip from 74th Avenue across the northern portion of the entire site, and that alone would remain Pro. And then the remainder would go from 74th Avenue all the way to Indian River Estates and be zoned CN.
So the reality is that you'd be looking at a B buffer on the west side, a C buffer on the west side by Pro, and a C buffer on the north side by Pro.
Correct.
C on the east at the Pro, and is it a B again on the C where it's commercial?
You lost me on that last
Where
term.
you go around the property, you've got Pro touching, and so you lose the B buffer is on the commercial side.
That's correct. The B buffer is only on the west side.
You go B, C, 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 B, right?
Yes.
You with me?
Yes.
I don't want to have to come draw anything.
Oh, I only see one B. I only see one B.
B is on the
that.
west.
Well, that's
The west
that's
one
why I
will-
was asking about the east side being a B.
The east
No.
side is
No, it's
adjacent
along
to 74th.
74th. Right. It's a roadway buffer.
It's the dual, the road buffer?
Right.
Okay,
60
sorry.
and the 74th.
Got it.
So we
Major
only
roadway
have one type B buffer, that's the west side on the CN,
Correct.
and then the C on the north side and nothing on the east.
Well, the roadway buffer on the east.
Right.
Yes.
That's
And
not-
you have a diagram there, again.
Did we
Please.
confuse things here? We know what we're talking
You
about.
got it? I've got to stay up here long enough to catch up with all this.
Could I add to that also on the, want me to put this up? Yep. On the Route 60 corridor plan, there's also buffering at the building and internal requirements.
Right.
That again, increase all of those things over anything else we had in place before the Route 60 corridor plan.
Now, for the audience that's here, what we just said is for the commercial node, for the property that wants to be rezoned commercial node, there will be a 15-foot,
Or type B buffer, yeah.
and it's a type B buffer. And what we mean by type B buffer, we mean the density of the planting and the height of the planting. So that buffer is more intense for that portion that buffers your wall and the commercial use. And on the north side of the property, that's zoned professional offices, and that buffer is a little bit smaller.
It's where the green is, but can you point to that as Donna talks, please?
Okay, that's what we call a type C buffer, and that's not a real dense or very high buffer. And that's where the professional office is still going to maintain the zoning. John, will you show the west, that portion that John's showing you now, it's further south, show the buffer between the CN and,
Go to the B buffer, which is down
okay.
there.
That section there would be a type B buffer, which means it's going to be of a certain height, a certain opaqueness, which means you can't see through it, and a certain width, which will be a lot more intense than if it was going to be developed as professional offices. So there is a little bit of accommodation here for the commercial use abutting the residential use. So that's what we were just talking about, the type of buffering that would be between your property and the commercial use.
I have a question for staff. If the property is developed as this picture shows, there has to be a retention pond someplace, whether it's where it is shown here or not. Now, if the scenario where you said that back portion that continues to be PRO is sold off, then, and that would be professional office, I mean, you're documenting something. So then would you have to have two retention ponds? You'd have one on the site where the building, where we're doing the CN, and then a retention pond on the PRO site as well?
You could either have separate ponds, or the owners could work together and share a common pond. That could still happen.
But is it going to be about the size that's shown there? If it's a
You know, I wouldn't get too detailed on this drawing.
Okay.
I wouldn't put much on this.
That will depend on the importance.
The important thing is the code will have to be met.
Right.
Whatever configuration, it has to be met, whether it's together or apart.
Right, one pond or two ponds.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, and then the other thing, I'm a little confused in 4A about the LDR change on page 3 of the uses. It says halfway down the page, roughly, automotive fuel sales is an administrative use permit under CN.
Correct.
And then if you go to 4B on page 5 of 12, 2/3 of the way down, or whatever, it says gasoline service stations, and there's nothing, so I'm assuming that means it's not permitted?
That's correct. Gasoline service station, our definition is kind of the old traditional gas station, which included car repair. So that's not allowed in CN, car repair. But a convenience store with fuel sales is allowed.
All right, thank you.
They can't do work on them. They can do drive-through gas stations.
Open the public hearing.
Afterwards.
Chairman Smith, members of the commission, thank you for your patience and attention this evening. My name is Greg Castellino. I'm an attorney with O'Hare Quinn. I'm here on behalf of the neighborhood. I'd like to start off by saying that the folks that took the time to come down here and join you tonight are not against development. They're in favor of responsible development under the current zoning. All that they ask when they come before this commission is that you sustain the current zoning. By necessity, because of what brings us here tonight, of course, that puts us in a position of having to ask you to deny this rezoning application, but that should not be misconstrued as meaning that a bunch of not in my backyard, no development whatsoever, people are bombarding you. That's just not the case. What is the case is that we've got an opportunity to participate in the public process, and that's what brings these people here tonight to both present argument and testimony that shows that this application is simply, in a nutshell, incompatible with the surrounding neighborhood. That fundamental criteria, no matter how much lipstick you put on it, doesn't change the simple fact that this rezoning application is not compatible with the neighbors and the neighborhood and the uses. Before I go any further, I'd like to introduce the folks that are going to be making our presentation. In addition to myself, we've limited the residents' representatives to just 2 speakers to try to keep things moving along tonight. Those 2 speakers are Carl Ravasi on behalf of the Indian River Estates Residents Association and Lynn Marvin on behalf of Indian River Estates West. Obviously, as you can see, we've got some members of the community as well as executives from ACTS with us tonight. In addition, with regard to some of the technical issues, we've asked George Simons of Carter & Associates to come, and he'll speak to several of the issues that we believe show that this is technically deficient. For those that couldn't come tonight, I'd ask to make a part of the record. I have 400 signatures from the neighbors that oppose this rezoning application and ask that the zoning remain PRO. In addition to that, this is not just simply one loud, large voice. I also have a letter from Bernie Grawl that I'd like to make a part of the record as well. He joins in our opposition to this rezoning application. Again, to put it simply, this rezoning application should be denied because the rezoning is inconsistent and incompatible. It's inconsistent with the LDRs, it's incompatible with the surrounding area, and in fact, the current zoning of PRO does serve a legitimate public purpose. And is consistent, in fact, the current zoning is consistent with not only the current LDRs and the current comp plan, but also the proposed EAR amended comp plan. And before I turn the podium over to our witnesses, I'd like to make a couple of general policy points that really struck me as I reviewed this application and tried to pull back and look at it from a big picture standpoint. First, and these were reemphasized tonight based on the questions that I heard from Commission and the back and forth, the issue of buffering. The whole point of PRO zoning is to provide a zoning district that is buffering. No matter how much landscape you put around the perimeter of this parcel, it's the parcel that's supposed to be the buffering. So as soon as you rezone the parcel, you've eliminated the whole point of that type of zoning, which is to create a less intensive use, and prevent uses not considered appropriate as permitted in a commercial zoning district. PRO district may serve as a buffer between commercial and residential uses or be established in areas in transition from single-family to more intensive uses. PRO district shall be limited in size so as to not create or significantly extend strip commercial development. We heard some talk tonight about this property having commercial zoning almost 30 years now in the past. Well, the 2-mile radius of this intersection has changed significantly since this property had commercial zoning. Again, making its current zoning more consistent and compatible. And in the proximity issue, it really struck me as to this next general point, that in order to craft an application, it was necessary to construct a proposed amendment that really stretches the purpose and intent of that 5-acre limitation and that proximity limitation. At this point, I'd ask Mr. Dean if he would put up the sketch he had up previously. Okay. That sketch really struck me tonight as putting the proof to the point that I'm trying to make. When you look at that, and regardless of how the configuration of the stormwater retention areas, that's the one, thank you, Mr. Dean, appreciate it. Regardless of how you arrange the stormwater retention areas, as a practical matter, this is not going to be developed as anything but one parcel with a commercial use. By the time you add your water feature, your stormwater features, landscaping, setbacks, entrances, etc., this is going to be a commercial use. So the idea that you're only rezoning 2.17 acres is a fallacy. You're not. In actual use, you're rezoning the entire parcel, because that's how, in a commercial reality world, it's going to have to be developed out. So this artificial construct of we're going to put just commercial on the front 2.17 and leave the professional in the back, I believe the applicant's own sketch, regardless of it being not a site plan, simply a preliminary sketch, if you will, puts the proof to that point. A couple other questions really quick of staff I'd like to ask. Stan, you made a point very early in your presentation that commercial nodes cross roadways. Can you point to any commercial node like this that crosses a arterial?
There's certainly commercial industrial nodes to the west and east of this that cross State Road 60.
Could you point to any commercial neighborhood nodes that cross an arterial? I'm
not aware of any.
Okay. The questions I asked him were really about what I felt was somewhat of a misleading argument about the State Road 60 jump, this existing buffer with the wall, and the 100-foot PRL. Again, all of this to me is based on a bit of a false argument, a false presumption that what you're really doing is only permitting a rezoning of 2.17 acres. And that's just really not in practical application what's happening here. This isn't really a question, but I'll turn the mic over to the resident after this. I'd like to make a point with regards to the statements that were attributed to ACTS back those years back when this was under review. Those, I've been advised that those statements were not made by an officer of ACTS. So I would ask that you add, you give them that weight, or what weight you will. And I would also highlight the point I believe Commissioner Keyes made with regards to the private deed restriction. That and the State Road 60 corridor requirements really are red herrings as to this rezoning application, because they have nothing to do with the type of uses that are going to end up on this project, which are more intensive, strip center style, if not a convenience store and gas station. And that was the inherent problem when we met with the applicant. It wasn't that we sat there and said, fine, we had to meet with you and that's all we have to do, so now that we've met, have a good day. It was more a situation, respectfully, where we were put in a position of being asked to blindly bid against ourselves, and that makes no sense. If they wanted, and when they asked us what uses we accept, the uses when you line up the PRO and the commercial neighborhood uses, the ones that are the same, obviously we have no bone to pick with. It's the current zoning. We have no problem with the current zoning. We would ask, though, that you deny this application. Now, at this juncture, again, I'd like to turn the microphone over to Carl Ravasi.
Greg, I have a question.
Yes, Chairman Smith.
Since you mentioned this, I was going to wait until you made your presentation, but back to the tabling of the LDR in July twice, and I admit that I could have been completely wrong in what I felt from the body language of the meetings. I really thought that there were concerns by the people you're representing as to the types of development that could possibly occur there that would not be conducive to their interests. And I thought that the meeting was going to be some interaction which possibly would come up with a deed restriction or something. So could you speak to that just a little more?
I appreciate that, and I understand exactly what you're saying. And all I can tell you is our response to that was, you're not showing us anything that would indicate to us that you want anything other than the right to have all of the available uses under the CN zoning. And I believe Commissioner Cox made a point about this in his question earlier as well. Under the zoning code, you can't cafeteria style. You can do, that's where the private deed restriction, of course, comes in, but we're not in a position to do anything other than ask that this commission and the Board of County Commissioners maintain the current zoning. There's been no submittal to us to say we are ready to do a site plan and it will be this and we will put in deed restrictions that permanently make it that. That hasn't happened, so how can we respond to that? It left us in a quandary. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Okay. Well.
My name is Carl Ravasi. I'm the president of Indian River Estates East, and I here represent my group. And I thank you very much for delaying the decision on the zoning from PRO to CN. It has given us as residents a lot more time to take a deeper look into the differences between those two zoning specifications. We residents are overwhelmingly opposed to the change to the CN designation because it opens up too many more possibilities from the PRO, which would have a negative impact on us as residents at that location. We are also not obstructionists and feel the current PRO designation is sufficiently broad to allow adequate business choices. You should also, before deciding, weigh the probability of a very great increase in traffic on Route 60 and subsequently along 74th Avenue. And I foresee, if you were counting that traffic, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 all the way out, rather than 1, 2, and 3. Further, the needs of the residents are adequately met by very nearby businesses. Our safety and continued satisfactory living conditions could be significantly altered if the new zoning request is granted. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening. I'm Lynn Marvin. I'm president of Indian River Estates West Resident Association. Carl was from East. I want to take a second to describe our community to you because I want you to know what it's like so that you will understand why we oppose this so much. It's a continuing care community. You have to be 62 to purchase a home. And when you come in, you buy either a 2, 3 bedroom villa, or maybe you buy a 1, 2, 3 bedroom apartment home. And as you age and as health problems occur, you move along. You might go to our assisted living area and then finally to our skilled nursing area. There are 2 communities in our complex, East and West, as you've noticed, and between these we have about 600 residents living in individual apartment homes and villas. We have 70 in assisted living, and we have about 100 in our skilled nursing center, which makes 770 people in our community. Our average age is 86.2. So we're up there. Most of us have located there because it gives us peace of mind about future health costs, and its security, and its lifestyle, and its quiet atmosphere. Now, Indian River Estates is part of ACTS, as you have been hearing, which is the largest nonprofit continuing care provider in the nation. Indian River Estates are 2 of its 23 communities. I'm telling you all of this because I want you to know that Indian River Estates is there to stay. We have been there 25 years, and as you can tell from comments made, the area has changed so much during that time. We are going to be there for a while. We're proud of the fact that it draws many senior citizens from other states and counties to this area. We strongly oppose BuildX Incorporated request to rezone the 2.17 acres from PRO to CN. The first reason is the traffic concern. Our community's main entrance is on State Road 60, and when it was built 25 years ago, it was a wonderful entrance and exit. But now, since State Road 60 is being enlarged to 6 lanes, times have changed. Now, if you exit our main entrance, you have to turn to the right, go west. Now, if you want to go east, you still go west. You go west for a few blocks and then make a U-turn. And you are entering out on a lot of traffic. And due to this, most of our residents use our back gate, which is located on 74th Avenue. And this leads us to a traffic light that gives us better access to State Road 60. In fact, our administration urges us to use the back gate because they feel it's safer for our residents. But 74th Avenue traffic has also increased. We have the St. John's of the Cross Catholic Church now on 26th and 74th, and that gives us traffic. And then we're creating it ourselves, but we're thrilled about it. We're building a new $30 million skilled nursing center. It'll be done in about 18 months, and entrance will be on 26th, and again using 74th. Now all of this, if you add the church, the medical center, and if you put a CN designation on the corner, traffic would be crossing the 74th to get into the CN designated area and out of. And you are going to present a real challenge for our elderly drivers. Another reason that we oppose this rezoning is that it puts our safety at risk. You saw by the diagram how close we are. A commercial business would bring many outsiders into this neighborhood. Some of our south villas would be 50 feet away from that wall from where this new business is, and it would be a very unsafe condition. The third reason we oppose this zoning is that it makes commercial enterprises often have extended business hours. Could be an all-night convenience store. This would present on bright lights, noise, and all of which would be very hard for our residents. So we strongly feel that our health, safety, and well-being would be compromised by this rezoning, and we request that you deny it. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Good evening, Chairman Smith and rest of the commissioners. I'm George Simons, President of Carter Associates, 1708 21st Street. I'm not associated with the development at the 3-acre site. I've done over 12 years now of consulting work for Indian River Estates, and I am the project manager for the skilled nursing facilities, which is ongoing right now. They asked me to look into some of this staff report and the comments and conclusions that the staff made to see if I could point out some inconsistencies and where perhaps the staff got a little creative and maybe painting a little different picture than what could happen. On the intensity, I know there was a statement made that the intensity at this level is not considered increased, but what we're talking about is going from a PRO to a CN. The residential use can go from RM6 to RM8, and the CN intensity for such things as impervious area coverage goes up, less open space, smaller yard setbacks. The uses have brought a range of more intense traffic uses. A couple of them have been mentioned, but just to give you an idea, in the PRO use district, a general office type building would be about 11 trips per 1,000 square feet. If you were to switch to CN and put in a convenience store, we're looking at 738 trips per 1,000 square feet. I get those numbers out of the Institute of Traffic Engineers 8th edition book for those type land uses. And of course the longer hours of operation can bring some noise and traffic at extended hours compared to the PRO. As far as the CN expansion, there's some things I'd like to touch on that. The code talks about neighborhood nodes shall consist of contiguous land area and may range from 3 to 5 acres. The code definition of contiguous would be next to, abutting, or touching, and having a boundary or portion thereof which is coterminous, coterminous meaning a common boundary, So you're jumping across State Road 60, and that would be stretching the way the interpretation of that code could be applied. In consistency with the neighborhood, under the consistency of CN district regulations, it's already been mentioned that the parcel would probably to be developed as one single commercial district or commercial use, and the CN node would actually be bigger than 5 acres if you counted the full 3-acre parcel. The CN node is not supposed to increase potential for strip commercial development. It looks like this particular parcel could accommodate a small strip commercial development. It's not really needed now with the development of the mall and the neighboring commercial sites up on 58th and so forth. One thing, they're supposed to be compatible with the residential character of the surrounding areas, and the area shall not be negatively impacted. I think you've seen evidence that the nearest neighborhood feels like they're going to be severely impacted. And we got a petition and testimony to that effect. Another thing in the commercial, in the CN district, is the limited access. It's supposed to be kind of a self-contained commercial area with one access point. Splitting it across the State Road 60, you'd have to have at least 2, so you're stretching the code and the interpretation of the limited access criteria as well. For all these reasons, I would request that you vote no on this request.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Commissioner, do you have any questions of anyone before I open the public hearing? All right, we'll open the public hearing now. And those that wish to speak, would you please come to the podium, state your name and your address before speaking.
Make sure they were sworn.
Good evening, I'm Honey Meduse. I live in the city of Vero Beach, and I represent the Indian River Neighborhood Association. The IRNA, the Indian River Neighborhood Association, was created some years ago just because this kind of situation was happening too often. And I'm sure it's no surprise that I'm here in support of the people who live in the neighboring areas. And the reason I do so is very, very simple. There is existing zoning in place that serves the entire area. And with all due respect to Mr. Butel, the fact of the matter is that there is no demonstrated need to rezone this property. This is exactly what we hear from the DCA, the Department of Community Affairs, again and again. You change the land use once, everyone wants to jump in, and you have a ripple effect, and before you know it, the whole corridor is threatened with change. So please respect the integrity of this existing land use. There is no justification for changing it. Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak during the public hearing? Hearing none, I'll close the public hearing.
Can I ask staff a question? Bob or Stan, inasmuch as we've got 2 issues here, one is the zoning change, and then we have the LDR to back up, and I guess that coordinates the distance that is only affected by this particular parcel, that everything here only affects this particular parcel, correct? Is there, because we've been told we cannot limit the commercial district's uses, but could we or could we not incorporate into the LDRs uses that may or may not be allowed on this property? Because we're building an LDR that's for this property.
No, we're not. We're doing a county-wide LDR change, but this is the only piece of property that qualifies for that. Now, you could go back, but it would take a a separate LDR amendment, but you could change the uses allowed
The
in
reason
CN
is the
district.
dilemma for me, and with all due respect to everybody here on both sides, is this property has been an enigma for a long time. This is not just currently PRO. It was originally in the old commercial. It was commercial, whether anybody likes it or not. It was commercial. The corner where Seal Suite is I have yet to find out how it was selected, but it was done at random as best I can tell. I understand all the concerns everybody has, and when you really go down the list, if you look at all the commercial uses, they're really only, in my opinion, there are only really 5 things I think that really probably cause your hackles to rise, starting with convenience store, gas station. There's a couple other things.
Hours of operation.
But I understand. But mostly, the other uses probably would be helpful and could be considered handy if they were there. And they're not going to create traffic problems, so I don't think traffic is an issue. I understand the safety issue for the fear with milling around hours at a convenience store, but if it's a doctor's office, I don't think that there's a fear of anything. Or if it's a shoe shop or a shoe repair store, I don't think there's a fear of anything.
Pharmacy.
So the reality is we're talking about a narrow band of uses in this commercial, and I understand the problem, but I am, in fairness to this property, this was kind of stuck out and it's been kind of ignored for a long time, and it's really come back to a head now. So I personally don't have the problem about not rezoning this that many of my commissioners or other people may have, but I would like to see it done in a way that would protect people. And I was hoping that we could put in something that would say, whatever goes in there, it's got to have limited hours, and whatever goes in there can't be this, because that's what you all's meeting was supposed to be able to address before. And I am very disappointed that neither side seemed to be able to handle that, because that was the issue when it came up the first time. There seemed to be 2 or 3 uses that were really a burr in everybody's soul, and I had hoped that the landowner and you would come together and would do that. And it hadn't happened, so we're going to have to make our decision based on what we have in front of us. And I'm not, exactly sure how it's going to come out, but I was hoping maybe I could back into it with the use of an LDR, but I've just been told I can't.
Well, I don't understand why we can't. If we can change
We'll do it for you.
we can, why can't we change, we can add some wording to this that says, if it goes from pro to CN, with these restrictions, then the hours of business will be till 10 o'clock at night.
Respectfully, the changes that the commissioner is being asked to make tonight are, first, an LDR, not a text change, which is what you're talking about, is changing, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bob and Stan, but you'd want to change the text of the LDR. That's not what you're being asked to do. You're being asked to apply this LDR to a specific, you're being asked to change it countywide, but not text-wise. Am I correct, Stan and Bob? So
that's what we're being asked to do, but
changing
we
the
could
text.
do something different than what we're asked to do.
No, I understand that, but what I'm saying is that would be a text change to an LDR, which would require a different hearing. It would require different advertising requirements and so forth. So while that's conceivable and possible, it's not something you can do tonight.
I would like to say something. Unfortunately, I was not here on the July 8th meeting, but I got to tell you, I regret tremendously that you were unable to work something out, something, perhaps a private deed restriction that would have precluded gasoline sales or other specific objectionable uses. I very much regret the fact that that was not worked out. And I got to tell you, I think that was an opportunity lost for both sides. I don't know how this is going to turn out. I don't know how my fellow commissioners are going to act, but shame on you both for digging your heels in and making it come down this way, because it was an opportunity lost for a community to come. If I were a benevolent dictator, I would sit you both down and make you get out a list, and we'd say, here's what we're going to allow and here's what we're not. But there was an opportunity lost. I'm not satisfied with either side's answer to how that negotiation failed. It sounded like it never even got started in good faith to me. And somebody's going to walk out of here very unhappy when it could have been a better result. Now, I'm going to get off my soapbox. I'm done saying that.
Thank you, Sam.
I like your soapbox.
I think just to, I don't want to be redundant because I was going to make sure that the audience didn't get redundant, but I agree with you, Sam. I left that July 8th, I believe, meeting or whatever it was, and we tabled it, pushed it up, and I felt that there was going to be some kind of meeting of the minds, that they'd come back to us with something that both groups could live with. Maybe not really happy, because they could live with, and I'm disappointed. Been a month that we had this tabled. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would like to echo what everybody said, and I have a real problem with the idea that this LDR change, if we went with it, it's countywide, but only pertains to this piece of property because it only fits the criteria. So it's only for this piece of property. If you say anything else, it's semantics. It's for this piece of property, so I don't see why there can't be conditions if it's not going to be applied elsewhere in the county, because nowhere else fits in the county. I agree that I'm terribly sorry that you couldn't come to an agreement. It puts us in a really hard place, to try to help both sides.
That's why we get paid the big bucks.
Right, big bucks. That's all I have.
Bob, the issue that we are seeing, that some of us would like to entertain, is an issue of law, period. We can't change the uses without doing as council said we would have to do. That's the law.
Correct. You cannot do conditional rezonings.
You can't do contract zoning.
Thank you.
But on the other hand, there can be a private agreement between parties that puts a deed restriction on, which is what I've heard several of the commissioners up here express that they wish that had been done, that would have been, but unfortunately we can't make that happen between the parties, and that's very regrettable. That's very regrettable.
Pilar?
No, I was just going to say, I think all we could do is provide them the opportunity to make that private agreement, and it didn't come to pass, so.
From either side.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I have a question of staff. Were it to come to pass that this rezoning was denied tonight, how quickly could the applicant come back and ask for? I mean, they'd appeal to the county commission.
Yes.
Correct. Your decision is final on the rezoning tonight, but it can be appealed. If it were appealed and the Board of County Commissioners denied it, it would be a year before they could come back.
Okay. That was what I was after.
Now, regardless of your action tonight, the parties still could get together and craft a deed restriction and present that to the Board of County Commissioners. Right. So they really get another bite at the apple if they want to going forward before the board meeting.
Thank you.
The LDR decision, regardless, goes to the county commission.
That's
correct.
Right.
If you denied the LDR, it would be a recommendation of denial to the county commission. It would still go to county commission for final. But that, in effect, would, if you denied the LDR, also affect the grant of the rezoning, because you really couldn't grant the rezoning unless you found you wanted to grant the LDR. But just to clarify.
But I mean, if the LDR failed, did the rezoning actually fail, or is the rezoning go into limbo?
No.
No. The rezoning will not have failed because we will just drop it from...
Well, you need to go ahead and consider the rezoning because...
Can you back away from the mic a little bit so we can understand what you're saying? A little bit more. Thanks.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. We can hear you, but when you're close to the mic, we can't understand the words.
The LDR is you're making a recommendation to the county commission for the LDR.
I guess which is up first for vote, the zoning
Well,
or
the LDR is up first for
That's
for
what I
vote,
thought, but I
because
mean,
you
if the
can't.
LDR failed,
If you deny it, we don't vote on B. Right?
Well, no, you'd have to vote on B, because it's before you. You'd have to vote on it even though you would deny it, because in effect.
kill the LDR, we pass the zoning?
No, but you still have to vote, you still have to consider it.
Then we add to the history of this property.
You have to consider it because it's before you, even though you didn't pass the LDR, because they then, I'm assuming that you would want this commission to make a determination so that you can then appeal it to the county commission.
Absolutely.
Right. So unless you did that, they would not have anything actionable to take to the county commission.
Okay. All right, thank you. Mr. Barquette?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for letting me come up. I realize the public hearing is over, but I'm back there being a little bit defensive because you guys are attacking us. I think what's fair to say is, at this meeting, the Indian River Estates folks were not willing to list uses that they didn't want to see. They just didn't want the rezoning. And we were not willing to keep throwing out uses. Well, how about this, how about this, how about this, until they said, okay, that's a good enough list. So I think the way to look at it tonight is, it's the whole thing. The way to look at it tonight is, this is what we're asking for. We're asking for the neighborhood commercial zoning district, which is designed for neighborhoods. And you have to take the whole gambit. And if there are a couple of possible uses in there, or 5, as George said, that may happen, that may be adverse in your abstract opinion, that's what you have to take. If there's another 45 that are good, I mean, that's just how you have to look at it. It's the whole list, because, again, not being adversarial with Greg, but they were not willing to list things, and we were not willing to just keep throwing things out until they said, okay, that's enough. So it's the whole thing. It's all, I mean, that's just the way it is.
Okay, that's fine. That's what we're here for.
We understand.
We can do that.
All right, I have a question of Melissa, and actually, Bruce kind of triggered my mind on this. It's a commercial neighborhood zoning, and in a neighborhood, you really don't want 24-hour open, maybe possibly on certain uses. I realize that that's something that we would have to address in a rezoning issue, I mean, in changing the uses in a later time. That's not something we can do tonight. Yeah. But I don't understand why tonight, if we are approving the rewording of an LDR to allow this, why we can't add our own words in here to change the rewording a little bit further.
Because that's not what has been advertised, that's not what is being considered here tonight. You can only consider what is before you.
I don't think so. Not on an LDR amendment.
And if you're changing the uses in a zoning district, that requires 2 public hearings before the Board of County Commissioners and 1 in the evening. I mean, it's a lot different when you're changing the uses in a zoning district.
Okay, not changing the uses in a zoning district. I understand that. That's another story. That's not something we're addressing tonight. What I'm saying is, if we have advertised an LDR change, okay, and now we are discussing it tonight, and instead of accepting the LDR change exactly as it is worded here, if we would say, for instance, this LDR change is based on the subject site being zoned PRO, and if so, the hours of operation shall only be till 10 o'clock. What's wrong with adding, and if so, the hours will only be till 10 o'clock?
Because that's a substantive change that you're making to the proposed LDR, and that requires you to go back and re-advertise. That's just the way the law operates. If you're going to change something substantively, you have to go back and re-advertise it.
We've changed LDRs before where they have had to come back, though, after rewording, though.
If this was approved tonight, wholeheartedly, I mean, it's an all or nothing vote, which is fine. If it's approved, do we have time to get an LDR in place that would not allow grandfathering in on this property, where we could control what was here in our fashion, since nobody else feels like it?
I think that's a question for staff.
Here's the dilemma, and I'll be candid. I mean, I believe this property owner deserves the right of change, but I would rather do it in a context that I'm comfortable that the people in Indian River Estates are not going to get rolled over, or with the fear of what is coming. We can control where we could control part of that. If they can't, we can. But I'm willing to change it otherwise. But I'm trying to do this within reason myself.
I can tell you what you can do in terms of LDR modifications. You could modify the CN zoning district, and for all CN throughout the county, you could establish hours of operation. That would be fine.
Right.
Or you could limit uses, even more so than they're limited
We'd
now.
be doing it for everybody.
Right.
All CN.
Right.
But we can modify the proposal for this CN.
But not tonight.
Okay, that's what I'm thinking.
Right.
We can't do anything tonight. But are we under the gun in the fact that if this was approved tonight, that there would be a period of time, good, bad, or indifferent, with the landowner where they could move in and do something if they wanted to without the? Do we have time to put any LDRs in that would allow us to get back to where we want to be? If not, can we continually table this baby for another? We did it on landmines. How long have we got?
I think
I can tell you, with the economy the way it is, I think you have a long time.
I tend to agree. I mean, but that's, but the reality is that I think that we need something. I mean, this is one. I'm telling you, this piece of property is unique in that sense. It's been hung out here all this time, and that's why it keeps coming up in front of us. It's a tough, that 2 acres dealing with it tough. Whether there's offices, if somebody wanted the office, they'd be there. If they wanted something, they'd be there. Well, I don't know what anybody's going to do with the commercial, frankly. But I mean, being a landowner, he's looking for probably more opportunity to do something with it.
I think the problem comes back, and I appreciate the suggestions, but the problem comes back is that we don't know what either side wants to try to modify in any way. We don't have any indication from either party how they would accept some change. So I see our hands tied in trying to do anything like that.
I'd just like to ask one question of both the representatives of the two groups, and I'd just like to know flat out, maybe I've already heard from Bruce, as far as you're concerned, are you completely precluded from revisiting the issue of sitting down with these people and trying to work something out? Is that foreclosed upon, or is there still an opportunity for that to occur? And I'd like to hear from the other gentleman here as well. Just so that I can be clear before, we make a decision here tonight.
I don't really see a need to meet with them again. They don't want it rezoned. We want it rezoned. There was no middle ground offered. I mean, the invitation was there. There was, and of all the things you said, the only one that makes sense to me is hours of operation. Because you're right, in a neighborhood commercial node, 24 hours of operation for most things doesn't make sense. Although if it was a pharmacy, it might make a lot of sense. So, to be honest with you, but the rest of it, a convenience store, I like convenience stores. They don't all, there are some really nice convenience stores. So I don't agree with, I'm not trying to pick a fight because that's really not in my client's best interest, but I don't agree with most of the things you guys have just said. I think the neighborhood commercial node is designed exactly right. The uses are exactly right. This particular property is perfectly set up for it, but the hours of operation does make sense because except for some rare things like maybe a donut shop and a convenience store, you wouldn't want to have 24 hours.
Could the hours of operation be done by deed restriction, private deed restriction between the parties? It can?
Well, I can't speak for my client because he's not here, but I think that one makes sense.
See, it's the late night deliveries and the late night traffic and all that, and I think it'd be great if you could agree.
Hours of operation are not the only objection that this neighborhood has, and that's whether we like it or not, sitting here tonight as the hour grows late, that's the fact. I love you too, Bruce. I enjoy working with him. I agree that we disagree. Reasonable minds may disagree. That is the nature of the deliberative process. That's what brings us here tonight.
A couple of hard cases.
Thank you. Commissioners, I need a motion.
Well, what do you think about denying the LDR as written now? Request that if the subject site is zoned pro, the hours of operations will be restricted to 10 o'clock p.m. and have staff bring the LDR back with that change, and then we hear for section B. So if the subject site was done...
How do we do that?
Well, we just ask staff to make the changes, and then we re-advertise the LDR.
Can we table the LDR subject to revision?
Yes. Exactly.
I'd go with that.
So if the site was previously zoned pro, when you're changing it to CN, it has an hours of restrictions at 10 o'clock p.m.
Any legal objections to that, gentlemen? And
I don't have any legal objections to it. It's more of a staff issue as to whether that is something that they would recommend and would work in this context.
No, I mean, it's our decision.
It's our decision.
We haven't, I don't have a motion, actually. Certainly don't have a second for discussion. I think we have to...
Okay, all right, I would like to make a motion. I would like to make a motion that we send back the land development regulation change to be reworded, showing that if the subject site was zoned PRO, that the new CN zoning would be restricted to hours of operations between latest at 10 o'clock at night, earliest 6 a.m.
For discussion, I'll second it.
There's a second. Discussion.
Can I get clarification?
Sir.
You're talking denying or tabling or suggesting to the board? I'm not sure which.
How do you suggest we reword this? Under what procedure?
I'd suggest that you recommend that the board deny the LDR amendment and instead direct staff to do a different LDR amendment with these two components that you're talking about, the separation distance change and then the hours of operation.
That was why, one of the questions I asked about the zoning issue.
Yeah.
Because Melissa says that we had, in her opinion, and we take a position on the zoning, which prevents this property for a year from coming back to any changes, regardless of our LDR change. And I think that, I'm not sure that I'd go along with that. I think that I'm not opposed to what you want to do at all. I mean, because if you don't do that, I'm going to make a motion to accept everything as proposed, and vote it up and down and move on. Because
I think if the applicant would agree to withdraw the rezoning request, knowing that you're going to deny the LDR, then they're not going to be prohibited from bringing it back for a year. Am I correct, or am I?
You're correct.
I think that could happen at the board level, too.
Then I would suggest for the applicants that if
they have their request before you.
We are voting, then if that's the case, if that can be done, then I would suggest that we vote on the LDR, however we're going to do it, and then give the applicant a chance after the vote to decide what he wants to do.
Or we can table the rezoning to time certain, and that's the same night the LDR comes back.
But stepping back from it all for a moment, I mean, in terms of the restriction on time, I mean, it's only worth going through this whole rigmarole if it's going to make people happier. I mean, because let's face it, if we're going to do that, we're not going to do it without passing it at the end of all this stuff. So, I mean, not the applicant, the people who object to the rezoning and the LDR change, why do this unless they're going to be understanding that most likely it's going to pass, but with the additional 10 o'clock restriction. Maybe they don't want to do that. Maybe they'd really rather have an up or down vote right now and know what it's going to be. I mean,
why don't we
and
make
he's shaking his head yes, so it's on like Donkey Kong.
As a discussion, and we're going to vote. We've got a motion and a second. But procedurally, we have a process. We listen and we vote. Both sides have told us up or down, and then whatever, in all probability, goes to the commission in one way or another. And I myself am not interested in prolonging the issue. I would rather myself up or down it. But can I have a repeat of the motion?
Okay. Do you have the wording, Rita?
She's earning it.
Okay. The motion was made to have staff go back and reword the land development regulation change to indicate that if the subject site is zoned PRO, that site, the hours be restricted 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., the hours of operation. And otherwise, we accept the other changes as suggested.
And is that a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners?
No,
No, it's a recommendation to you to change it before we send it to the Board of County Commissioners. And then we get it back again.
Okay, but you're talking about changing the entire CN zoning district?
No.
For every...
No.
Okay.
Just only if it's zoned prior. Only if it has been prior, because we're addressing one piece of property here, Bob. This is not the CN zoning. This is one piece of property this LDR changes for, so we can make that wording apply to one piece of property.
I don't think you can.
May I make a suggestion? May I suggest that you vote on what is before you right now, up or down on both? And then if you want to make those changes, that would be a separate motion to the county commission to direct staff to do that.
We already, but we have a motion.
We have a motion.
But you're not voting on what's before you. You're trying to change.
But we've done that many times. We send land development regulations back to be changed.
Exactly. You send them back to be changed. That's not what's before you today. What's before you today is a change to the LDR as it's proposed and a rezoning. If you want to engage in changing the LDRs differently, you need to make a recommendation to the county commission to direct staff to do that.
With respect, I think the problem, where we are now is we need to take a vote. Both sides have asked us to take a vote. The problem is a procedural one in that we have a motion and a second that we need to dispose of before we can move on to the vote. So there was a restatement of the motion, and now I think we need to take a vote on that, dispose of it, and then move on to the real vote. Is that correct?
Can the motion be just withdrawn?
Yes. I'm not withdrawing it.
We have a motion and a second.
This piece of property will be restricted to 10 o'clock p.m. according to these changes. And only this piece of property.
Donna, I think you're correct in what you're saying. But I think the part is that to get to where you wanted to do, you had to deny what's in front of us first to go to the commission with denial, and then you came up with this motion. The question was what happened then with the zoning.
Why don't you withdraw it until after the big vote, and then you can reintroduce it, depending on how the vote turns out.
All right. How about we send up the recommendation to Board of County Commissioners to approve this with that change? Does that work better? With the 10 p.m. change?
Yeah, you can send it out and we'll look and see whether it's illegal. I mean, essentially, I think it would be the same thing as another motion, because this would have to be re-advertised, I think.
Yeah, so you're asking the commission to vote on something which hasn't been properly advertised.
Right.
Well, you've got you've got time to advertise.
You've got to advertise.
But it's not properly before the commission yet. It has to be properly advertised and go through the proper channels before the commission can vote it up or down. Otherwise, the vote's not effective. That's why I think it's wise to vote on what's before you up or down, and then go back and recommend to the commission that the LDRs be changed the way you want them to be changed.
Donna, I think understanding what she's saying, I think Mr. Chairman, if I could, I would suggest that we vote on the land development regulation, up or down. If it happens to be down, then I think you can offer the applicant the opportunity to withdraw the zoning, which would then allow us to send the LDR denial to the county commission, and in another motion, if you wanted to start an LDR process while that is going on to the commission, without having penalized the applicant on the zoning, then he could come back on the zoning in the future within the year, and we could have time to put an LDR in place that might solve the problem of this property or this area. And I think that would be it. So
Yes, that's,
But in order to proceed, we need the motion withdrawn.
Or we,
it either needs to be withdrawn or denied.
Correct.
If you've seconded it, you can vote to deny it, and then you can start all over again.
Okay, I'm not going to withdraw it. We'll have to vote on it.
then we vote.
All right. All those in favor of the motion and the second signify with an aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Like
No.
sign?
No.
No.
Okay.
Aye. And that was,
Well, it's.
Yeah, could you raise your hand if you're not in favor of the motion, please?
The noes?
The noes, yeah.
The yeses was just me and Dr. Cox.
Pardon?
Dr. Cox and I were the only two that voted yes.
And George.
I voted in favor of it.
Oh, you did?
I did.
George voted in favor.
Because I'm getting ready, since it failed, I'm getting ready to make a motion that we accept staff's recommendation and we send this straight up to the county commission as recommended by staff.
I second that motion.
discussion.
You're
Voting that this property will move up as presented by staff, zoning change, all doors open, full commercial, as presented in the deal. It's a vote, if you vote in favor of my motion, you're voting for changing the zoning regulation as presented.
The zoning or LDR?
LDR, which would then lead to the zoning.
Right.
If not, then you're denying that in this process with which I outlined before. This is the vote.
A straight vote.
It's a straight vote.
What the parties want.
No, I mean, I agree.
I don't, you know, and with all due respect, I really think that they're right. There's a lot of opinion, public or not, everybody can duly agree or disagree, and I think you just vote in favor of how you want to do it. If you really want to tighten up restrictions, you probably should deny it and try and manipulate it later. If not, then you either kill it or you vote for it.
You vote for it, A and B, you're sending it to the commission. And that's your,
I'm going to oppose that recommendation.
wait a minute, I need a,
Oh, we need a second.
I seconded
Oh, I'm
it.
sorry.
Seconded it.
Okay,
For
discussion.
discussion, I'm going to oppose that just on the basis of public health, safety, and welfare. I just want to be clear, and that I really think these people need to sit down and figure it out.
All right, but after this then, let's say it gets voted down, then do you make another recommendation that it go?
You know, if my motion on the LDR gets voted down, then I think it's fair to suggest that the applicant have a choice to withdraw or not. If not, he can appeal straight. We then vote on the zoning, which would probably be the same type thing. It goes to the county commission on appeal, and they deal with it however they want to deal with it.
But I got to tell you, what I have heard both parties say is they want a straight vote. I didn't hear either party say that the 10 p.m., 6 a.m. thing was, splitting the baby and we're all happy and kumbaya. I heard them say, let's have a vote, and however it lays at the end of that vote is what we're going to live with. So I understand that it's a nice idea, the 10 p.m., 6 a.m. thing, but even if we were to achieve that at the end of the day, it's not what anybody's saying is the real hang-up. It's not what anybody's saying is really going to be the wise solution to the end of it. They're both saying, have the vote. Let's have it done. That's what we're giving them.
I've already voted.
so that motion is as to A,
Let's present the LDR to the commission. That's it.
and there's a second. All those in favor? Aye.
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 All those opposed?
Aye.
Aye.
Fails 4-3.
4-3.
Thank you, George.
All right, as to,
I appreciate
Wait.
you sticking your head out there.
as to B,
Ask the applicant if he wants to withdraw.
the applicant wished to withdraw.
For the simple reason.
Please.
For the simple reason that Sam said, that the hours of operation might be fine with us, but that's not what the neighbors want. So no, we won't withdraw.
Okay.
We're not going to withdraw.
Then, for the purposes of the second motion, I would move that, if we've killed the first LDR, if we've done the LDR rule like that,
We still,
I will say that we would move that the motion on the zoning move forward I'd be in favor of the commercial, but, how do we do that now?
Well, I
just
think
vote straight up or down on B.
to be consistent, you'd have a motion to deny. But there's
Yeah, I mean,
no
that's what-
requirement to be consistent either.
This is a pro forma vote. This is a meaningless vote.
We have a
Right.
monopoly
Well,
on
not
inconsistent
necessarily.
vote
I mean,
here. Are you
the-
kidding me?
We can't.
What it is,
One of-
you don't
one of-
make a final decision on the LDR, so.
I would
if-
suggest somebody that wanted to deny, make the motion there.
May I point out that staff's recommendation to you, when it recommended the zoning, was based on the supposition that the LDR was going to pass. Now that the LDR hasn't passed, their recommendation, I believe, would change to denial since it's not.
Well, the board's going to make the final decision on
No,
the LDR.
I understand that, but as the rezoning, okay.
But I don't think it's fair to the, I don't think it's fair to the applicant. I mean, we've had a 4-3 vote, and I assume that the next vote, up or down, would be a 4-3, the people that recommended one way or the other, and that's what you're telling your commissioners. And otherwise, what you're recommending is a 6-0 vote in favor of denial.
Can we move to table? And I know that sounds ridiculous, but
let's
the
vote.
applicant's going to get penalized if we vote no on this rezoning, and it's not fair because...
We just voted no on the rezoning, basically.
No,
We basically did it.
We voted no on what
No.
would give him
No, you voted no on the LDR.
On the LDR, we had not...
Yes, you can
But that
table it.
precludes,
You can
that
table it.
precludes a rezoning.
All right, how long will it take for this LDR to go before the Board of County Commissioners?
Well, I think we're going to take it the first meeting in September.
Okay, then, what's the date of the second meeting in September? Of our P&Z meeting in September?
I don't know.
I think it's the 7th, or that's the first.
That's what's the first.
No, the board meeting is on, I think the board meeting is 7th and 14th.
Move to deny.
Does she mean the P and Z
I
meeting?
think it's September 9th.
Board meeting.
Second is the 13th, no,
Zoning
23rd.
changes.
September
23rd?
9th.
23rd. Okay. All right, so that makes it September 23rd. Now, I know everybody here is sick and tired of coming back, but we've just done something that we're trying to help you, but we also don't want to penalize the applicant because we're trying to come up with a compromise y'all wouldn't come up with. So I'm going to make a motion to table the request for rezoning to September 23rd. Do I have a second?
Bruce is shaking his head. He doesn't like that idea.
I don't understand
And they're trying to do it for the...
By the 23rd, we will know what the Board of County Commissioners has...
for discussion.
Okay.
Okay?
Have a motion and a second for discussion.
I'd like to hear from the applicant on
Yeah.
this,
Once again, he
please.
doesn't want it.
Yeah,
We just don't want to penalize you, Bruce.
You already have.
I'm sorry, but, you know,
He's not asking.
no, I mean, no offense, you're trying to do good, but you're doing bad. The hours of operation, yeah, we might be agreeable to it. They don't really care about that. That's not their issue. And you voted it down, so, well, first of all, I won't be here on the 23rd. I mean, that's one big point. But the point is, I'm going to appeal, whatever you do, I'm going to appeal to the county commission.
Right.
I want a decision on the ordinance amendment and the rezoning up or down. You've got a very good ordinance. It restricts the uses of neighborhood commercial, and I want the board to vote on that for this property. This property was designed for it, and that's what should happen.
Right.
And if the applicant and the neighbors agree on hours of operation, that's between them. But that one issue, the hours of operation, isn't their only concern, and you haven't done anything to appease them. You really haven't.
The dilemma for me, Melissa, was the fact that since the LDR is there, it's hard for me to say, okay, I'm going to make a motion to approve this. So I'm going to make a motion, we deny the zoning as presented by staff.
I think there's a motion, yeah.
There's a motion
For
on
a
this.
table.
Okay, wait a minute, I'm sorry, there's a motion on the
Okay.
floor.
I forgot it too. All right, we have
Yeah.
we have a motion on the floor and a second to table. B, all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Like sign, aye. Now I need a
Okay, I'm
motion
going
on Bill
to
B.
move that we deny the zoning on the property.
Second.
I'll second it.
We got a second.
Any discussion?
Further discussion.
Hearing none.
So that, the applicant's just right back where he's been for however many years.
Year's
You
penalty.
can appeal to the...
With a year's
appeal to the-
penalty.
No, he's
You
going to
appeal to the
appeal.
county.
He's going to
appeal. He can
That's
appeal to
right.
the county
This is-
commission.
This is
Okay.
the process, so let's get done with it.
Yeah, you're basically allowing the appeal to go forward to the commission, and then it's a commissioner matter.
So my understanding is that a yes vote on this motion is to deny, and a no vote
Is to
is to approve.
Correct.
Got it.
Okay. There's been a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed?
The motion is to
Favor
deny the
denying
zoning.
Denying the zoning.
Okay?
Deny
Deny
B.
the zoning. So if
No
you vote
on
yes,
B.
you're denying the zoning. If you do not vote yes, then you're approving the zoning.
Come on, guys.
We've got to be consistent.
Okay.
Aye.
I don't see a reason.
Aye.
You're going to deny the rezoning?
Yes.
Yeah.
All those in favor of
Consistent
denying
with
the
what we did with the first one.
rezoning?
With what you just did.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No.
No.
We gave you your motion and we voted against my own. Yes, we're done. You're a marvel, George.
Yeah. I don't quite know what you
I don't see.
Excuse me, can you just,
Okay.
who was opposed to that?
Sam and I.
Just the two of you? Okay.
George has been doing it that long here.
All right.
He can do it, but
That completes item 4. Commissioners' matters. I have one. And I'm sorry I forgot to talk to staff about this before I'm going to bring it up. But I would like to see the commission forward to the Board of County Commissioners a request that funding be made available to contact owners and constituents, and that's not the word I want to use, but affected parties, so that in a condition like this, it goes to the owner, but it also goes to the association president, whatever it may be, so that all parties that are going to be affected, we make sure we get that information out to them. So we can't vote on that.
Are you asking for one of us to make a motion on that?
I don't think you need a motion. It's just a recommendation.
It's a
by consensus.
By consensus.
I think we need it.
Is anyone opposed to that going forward to the Board of County Commissioners?
I think it's a good idea.
All right, so unanimous request of the Board of County Commissioners, Bob, and I assume then that you will forward that for us.
And you're saying, besides property owners that we already notify, you're saying associations.
The problem, Bob, and you know very well, in the Axe case, we sent the notice to the Axe office, XYZ country, and the people, and it took them a while to ever get back, so that they weren't noticed. The real property owners were not noticed in a timely fashion.
Right. So, but you're saying owners and property owners associations.
I don't really, to tell you the truth, Bob, I don't want to restrict it to something like that wording specifically, because my intent is that it be studied by staff. We find out, you find out who needs to be notified because they've got an interest. And then those people are notified. If they don't want to show up, so be it.
But we've got to
at
give them
least-
some criteria. You can't just say, yeah, how is staff going to know
the
who is going
surrounding
to be
property
affected?
owners-
But I want
Sign the
them,
property.
I want them to come up with that criteria.
We notified all the
and
property
suggest it
owners.
to
The houses
the,
in the close proximity.
They were not.
they already
property
do that.
owners.
Right.
They,
Okay.
I feel it's a matter of common sense. You know when one of these come up, and it's not very often that they do, that you find out those parties that need to be notified, and we notify them. In this case, it is the people that live in the associated housing. They have an association president, so we'd have notified them.
Association. If he'd notified the local property owners association, it probably would have eliminated the problem. Right. The dilemma they have is if they don't own the properties, who are the landowners? It's something that's invisible. So I think that from our standpoint, at least as a start, you say property owners associations.
Okay. All right. Owners and Property Owners Association. All right. Any other commission matters? Planning matters?
None.
Attorneys matters?
No.
We put you through the ringer tonight, though. We are adjourned.
Melissa said.